Hello, children of the night. It's interview time. That is right. We got magic artist Stephan Martiniere. He has done a lot of stuff and not just magic related. His resume includes Guardians of the Galaxy, Venom, the original Inspector Gadget cartoon. It makes my resume look positively anemic. Get it? Vampire? Anemic? Will you edit this sound of laughter in later?
Sure.
And can you also cut this out because I don't want people to know how bad I bombed?
Of course.
Okay. Just a friendly reminder, Concepts and Legends is an official TCG Player affiliate. If you want to buy any RPG or trading cards, just click the affiliate link listed below the video. You get the cards you want, and it helps us bring you better videos, and any help is greatly appreciated. And be sure to stick around after the interview to see who this week's winner is for the weekly giveaway. And now, let's get to the interview. Thank you very much for taking the time to do this. I appreciate it.
No problem.
The first question that I have is, I want to know how old, and I ask this to everybody, how old were you when you first started doing art?
Oh my God, art. Oh. Well, if you're talking about the doodles from when you were a kid, then pretty much, from the moment I was 5 years old, if not even sooner. More seriously, I think I was more into it when I was a kid than any other kids. If I had time to spend, I was always, trying to spend it drawing as opposed to, going play outside to do other things. It was just, I kept doing it because I loved it. But really seriously, not until I got to an art school when I was 15, when I really realized that being an artist could be a profession. Not that I didn't know that before, because I was surrounded with comic books. France was a huge place, golden age of comic books during the 60s and the 70s. So I was always surrounded by it. So I always knew that being a comic book artist was always a possibility. And actually, I was drawing, thinking, maybe one day I would become a comic book artist. But I never really fully realized until I got into an art school that there was so much more in terms of possibilities as an artist to be able to express and create art for other types of industries. So I would say seriously, at the age of 14, 15.
And you got admitted to a prestigious art school. And now, is that an early age to start an art school? Or I don't know the differences between, like, say, France and America.
Yeah, it is, in a sense that it was a unique type of school, not like the classic Les Beaux-Arts, and all these kinds of, university level and art school that you usually do after a bachelor's degree. So these type of schools, you would do, when you're about 18, 19 after your bachelor's degree. But in France, they have these programs of being able to allow you to do school program very intensively, still doing the academic requirement at age 15. And so they have these art schools that are really focused not just on the art, architecture, drawing paintings like Les Beaux-Arts, but more towards what's being used and utilized in the industry professionally. So the school I was in was an art school that was really tailoring towards, teaching you tools to be efficient in a very wide range of fields in the industry. And that includes, architecture, fashion designs, advertising, photography, and all the other electives we have, like tapestries, typography, comic books, animations, there was sculptures, color studies, anatomy, perspective. There was a whole wide range of courses that the school were required to give you to really prepare you for an active, professional life after doing 4 years, and sometimes even 6 years if you really wanted to continue in very specific branch, that would allow to do that. So I was pretty serious and very intensive in some ways, because not only you had to learn all the stuff about the art, but you had to keep up with the rest of the academic courses, the French, math, language, history, and all that kind of stuff. So I was pretty loaded, for 4 years.
And then you finished that, and then you somehow managed to get a job working in Japan on Inspector Gadget, right?
Not quite. I finished the school, and then I was not quite ready, and I didn't know exactly where I was going to be going after that. So after my 4 years, I had different options. So I applied to become a teacher in a school that was, training people to become art teachers. That was one thing that I pursued. I entered to also try an architectural school, and then I also entered in an animation school. And actually, that is the one that I picked out of all the choices, and simply because I thought, without knowing a lot about animation at the time, that I always thought animation was almost like a, a, a comic book that moves. And since I was still very interested in wanting to do comic books, it just seemed to make more sense to go that direction. So I went to animation school, and I was supposed to do a couple of years there, and I never finished it. So after my first year, this is when I was offered to work in Japan on Inspector Gadget, which I didn't know at the time was going to become a game changer
It's
and
huge.
a life changing for me as well, because that was such an unexpected project, and it came out of nowhere. So, obviously I never felt the need to come back to school and finish my last year in animation, since I was already in the middle of it. And that was the beginning of my career, really.
And then did that transition into the ability to get to do the Madeline series that you did?
Yeah, so it's during these years in the animation industry that I started learning the ropes, and I was also traveling between Los Angeles, France, and Japan, and working on all the different TV series that the company was producing. And in the process of learning all that stuff, I felt the need to just be more than just an illustrator or an animator. And so I was very interested in directing. And that's always been, connected to, the storyteller in me, which is why one of the reasons I wanted to be doing comic books as well, because the storytelling was very important to me. So I thought directing would give me that opportunity to really create, and get involved, much deeper in the animation process. So I became a director. And one of the project down the line, after directing, several different series for the company, was that Madeline project, which became, one of the most fun project I worked on, I have to admit.
Yeah, that also was a huge success. I mean, you got nominated for an Emmy. I mean, and to be part of that like classic story, which I mean, it was big over here. I can't imagine how big it was over in France.
It's funny. It was not.
Really?
Because it's not a French character. I mean, it's very English, and then so I think it's much more known in the U.S. and England than it is in Europe. I didn't even know about the character when I was offered to direct it.
That's funny.
Uh, to an extent that I says, well, what am I going? Well, what am I even thinking about doing a little cartoon girls, stuff? They honestly, they gave it to me because I was a French director, and they said, "Oh, it's a story about a little French girl, so let's give it to Frenchie," and because he's perfect for that, right? And it's my wife actually who convinced me to take the project, because she grew up with it, and she says, "Oh my God, you have no idea what it is. You have to take it."
Is she American or is she from France?
She's American.
Okay,
She's
so
American.
she knew. She
And
knew.
so she knew. She says, "You have to do that. This is such a beautiful little story, and these books are just, wonderful." And so I got into that, and yes, I mean, I realized what it was, and I fell in love. I fell in love with the project. I thought that was one of the most unusual project for me, because I tend to work in different style or think differently, but this somehow totally resonated with me, and I felt totally at home with that. And again, it's like every project you do, you don't know how successful that could become, and it became a big thing. Interestingly enough, not right away, which is interesting, because you have to kind of, look back at the industry at the time, and it's always, a given that, the toy market, is always favoring boys, at least the kind of project that the company was doing, much more than it was geared towards a girl market. And so Madeline was a very odd product for the company, because there was not a toy line behind it to endorse like all the other projects we usually did. It was just a one-shot deal from HBO, because they were looking for a company to produce a special for Christmas. So there was really no future, but just doing a special for that particular fifth book of the story. So I didn't even think there would be even anything more than that. But because it was so well received just on that first special, the company just got offered to do the whole book series as a musical adaptation. And then it started become, much more interesting. But it really became popular years after even that series was finished, because people still did not believe that a little French girl in a vine house in Paris would be a product necessarily that would be popular enough to generate a lot of attention. So it took actually a lot of years for people to realize, you got something here it's really cool, and it should be done more than just the 5 books. So they pursued that later on, and I went back to work on more of a TV series, and then the movie happened and all that stuff. But that was more down the line, and I was not there anymore at that point. But that
Yeah,
was definitely one of the most fond memories I have, in the animation industry.
it's crazy because growing up, I'm a child of the 80s. So all of the stuff that you worked on, I was watching as like a little boy. I was watching Inspector Gadget when I was 5. And
Yeah,
I remember watching the Madeline series. And then, of course, you did Where's Waldo, which I don't think
yeah,
there was anybody who wasn't. If you were a child and you were alive at that time, you were into that. That was even bigger than
yeah, that's true.
it's almost like how many successful like knock them out of the parks can you have? So what time did you get involved with Wizards of the Coast, and how did that transition? Because it's a very different world that you're working in.
It is, and it's not. I mean, for me, when I left the animation, I had done like 10, 12 years of animations, doing pretty much, everything out there. Uh, I felt the need to go back to more design, roots, art, creative process. Directing in TV animation is very harsh. So I went into a theme park industry, and that became very, very creative. Um, and somehow, by touching a new industry for me, just also allowed me to explore other avenues and meet new clients and friends and expand, my client base, and slowly touched a different aspect of the industry. Worked on some TV series, a little bit on a film project at some point. So I started to kind of diversify my skill set into things that I was also very comfortable, and I've always been comfortable from the beginning, which is doing hardcore sci-fi fantasy stuff. So at the same time, I was very comfortable doing cartoon, and I could do a project like Madeline and be totally at home with that. I was also completely into doing concepts, very realistic concept for science fiction and fantasy, projects. So I was always kind of dancing between these two aspects of concept, and being, very happy with that. So magic happens when I was already very entrenched and had already a certain reputation and experience in many different fields of the industry. The film, for one,
Yeah, you've done
the
everything really. You've done a lot of stuff.
pretty much, I think, yeah, there might be a few things I haven't done, but in terms of concept for art concept for that industry, yeah, it's like it's been all over the place. And so I started doing Comic Con, and I think that's what got me to magic. Comic Con, I was going there for many years, always as just an attendee. just to look around and have fun, until one day someone says, hey, you should really, have a space there and show your work, and I said, well, I don't have much to show, because being a concept artist in the industry, especially at the time, there was no internet. So all you have is a portfolio. And when you work for the industry, there's a lot of work you can't show. It's all under NDA.
Right, right.
Film work, animation work. So I was not like one of these painters, artists, or even book cover artists, that has work that you own, that you produce, that you can sell. So I didn't know what to do, and I said, okay, well, I'll try it once. And I think that's when I realized that although I didn't have really a lot of work out there that was work that you could sell, I was known by people. And so the moment I started sitting in one place and people started to come and see me, I realized a lot of people knew me. The industry knew about me, but I didn't realize that until I sat down in one spot and people started to come to you. And so then I started to take it very seriously and start to create art that I could show more and potentially sell, to justify, being there and having a space and having fun with that. And it's how, one day I met Irene, no, it was not Irene, it was Jeremy Crawford. Came to my booth one day, and he had seen me before, and he knew my work from other projects and stuff. And he says, hey, would you like to do some magic art? So to me, that's how it started. I says, okay, well, why not? So I was familiar with the game. I didn't play it, so I did not understand the rules, and I was not into into it like a lot of fans, but that I definitely knew the art and what it was all about, because I had many friends who were doing that already. So so I knew that it was cool, that there was some really beautiful stuff that was being produced for that project. So I said, hey, I've never done anything like that, and I'd give it a shot.
And
And go ahead.
oh, and then so yeah, and I was just to say, and then how did you get to be thrown into the Fraxions? Because that's really a lot of your like super iconic ones that I've seen are the Fraxions. I just am curious about how they were designed and where the influences were, and how much of you is in that versus how much were you told what they were supposed to look like, that kind of stuff.
Well, it's interesting, because not being deep into the magic world, and knowing the intricacy in the world and all that stuff, I was never really aware of what's important versus not, or what is a big card versus a normal card. So, and I was never really asking. I was just magic to me was more of it was a fun thing to do, and because magic, the way you create these cards, and because they're very small in format, kind of allowed me to develop a technique where I could be very efficient and quick, because of the format, and try to approach it in a very efficient way. And so I was always able to take these cards, because these were not like film projects or animation project or film project where you hired for weeks on to work and create many different things. So I could call Jeremy and I says, hey, I got a few days here, or I'm going to have a break in my schedule between films and project, and I'd like to take a few cards if you have some available. So it's always how I can approach, the magic, the magic cards. And so, I mean, I'm sure you've talked to other artists. I mean, the brief are pretty solid. There is a world that's being created with some very specific guideline as to what these characters or environment needs to be. But that at the same time, there's a lot of freedom. There's always been a lot of freedom. So there are key elements, like you mentioned the Phyrexian. I mean, I knew from the beginning that these were creatures that were created from flesh and metals and parts and things like that. So that's the direction. As to the exact look, that was always left to the artist. Sometimes they could tell you it has to be that size, or it has to be able to do this kind of damage, or it has to be able to do that in particular, that kind of directs you in terms of the concept itself. But I always found that there was a lot of flexibility in terms of the interpretation, the visual interpretation of these, given the guidelines that Jeremy and the other art directors were giving me.
Yeah, there's definitely I'm sure I mean, I know you've heard of probably the expression steampunk, but there is an element of steampunk to them, and definitely H.R. Geiger. You can see that there's inspiration from H.R. Geiger. One thing that I kind of noticed out, and I wasn't sure about this. I know that you worked on Independence Day, but I swear that I saw the Independence Day aliens in some of the earlier Phyrexians, and they somehow made their way. I mean, like, I don't know if somebody was playing Magic and then did the movie, or I'm not sure, but I definitely see a connection there.
Oh, there is definitely a connection. I mean, you can't generate any kind of concept art, just like in a vacuum. All this is based on all the past experience and influences that you have from the very beginning. So even the very early art, the very first art that I've ever did for Inspector Gadget were influenced by comic book artists that I grew up with. There was a style that I was familiar with, and infused it, with artists that were very well known at the time. So every field that I've ever got into, I always brought my influences, and I had many. I mean, like many artists, when you're passionate about arts, your interest is all over the place. So, from luminaries like Mobius, and Drouillet, and guys like Franquin, and all the Americans like John Buscema, and Jack Kirby and Bernie Wrightsons, and science fiction painters like Chris Farce, and there's just to name a few right there. All these were influences of things that you carry in your work in one fashion or another. So at the time I was doing magic, I had so much, influences and things that I liked, but obviously it carries over, some more than others because it fits the subject. So I'm not surprised that you could see a piece of an alien from a movie that I've worked on, or another piece of something that is connected to another film project or a theme park, or another book cover. But, everything kind of mixes. Every time I work on a project and I've learned something and I explore something new, it always carries on to another project. It's kind of, I think it's unavoidable, and it's part of the process of being an artist.
And you're distinct in that way, in a sense that not everybody is a Renaissance artist, in the sense that you seem to be very just very at ease with, like, saying, okay, I'm going to do comic books and I'm going to kick that, I'm going to knock that out of the park. And then I'm going to do creatures and I'm going to knock that out of the park. And then I'm going to help design a theme park and I'm going to knock that out of the park. And then, so, I mean, it's interesting. It's fascinating that you're just like, oh, well, this is how it goes. And it's like, that's it's cool to see your mind and how it works in that sense.
It is very interesting because I always thought, being trained in France and being trained in that particular school, in some respect, where they didn't know where you would end up, so they were trying to teach you as many different things as possible, but also at the same time, I was so driven with different style of comics at the time because I loved it. But I always thought everybody was like that. I always thought every artist is the same, right? And actually, it was interesting because my career started in the US. And the US is very, very specific in terms of how things are being divided, in terms of a project and how the art is being processed. And so I discovered something I didn't know. So I didn't know that, when there's a comic books, there's a guy who does the colors and a guy who does a pencil, and then there's an inker, and there's a guy who in France, most of the time, an artist does everything.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Animation process also is the same. It's a broken down process. An artist does very specific things, but not everything. So you would do environment like I did for many years, but I wouldn't do the color. The color was assigned to a guy who is specialized in colors, who take the design and colors. And same deal with characters. Do characters, but it's always black and white. And then someone handles it. At least for animation, that's a process. That's an
Right.
efficient process. So to realize that I was comfortable doing many different things, actually was an advantage in some ways, because yeah, I could be very flexible, and I could just be jumping from one project to another with ease and liking it all the time. Uh, but it's something, you're right, that I've discovered that it's not everyone that does that, which
Yeah,
is interesting.
and I think that's interesting to hear that that's something that is distinctly American, or that is something that's heavily used in America. I wonder if that has to do with the fact that we were very, industrial revolution kind of mindset, where, everything had to be like a cog in the machine, so to speak.
Well, yeah, in some ways you could say that, because I mean, it is definitely a much bigger industry, in some ways, especially when you look at the American comics. I mean, it's enormous. It's enormous. And you have to produce, at a very fast pace. The schedule to create, a comic book in France is nothing to do with the pace that you could go, doing it in the US for a comic, and it's even worse to Japan. I mean, look at the
Oh yeah,
Japanese. Oh my God. So
it's
yes,
almost it's brutal that they work
yeah,
so
it's
much.
it's a very different culture with different goals and a different market, and so yes, you learn, you adapt with that, which is a good thing. It was a very good thing for me too, because being very kind of at ease with taking the time to do things and being thrown in an industry that has some very fast pace requirement, you learn a lot of things. You learn to adapt, and you learn to create things very differently from one project to another, which is, why I always love to do the magic cards in some ways, because I was kind of a step back from the pressure of the industry when you work on film or these heavy projects, because I knew I had the time. I was trying to confine myself with a certain amount of time I wanted to spend on the card, but I knew if I wanted to spend more, and if I was really into it, I could. I was not under pressure. And that's very important. And it's still very important to me, because there's a part of me always wants to learn something and grow. And so if you're always doing the same thing for the same industry and you're always under pressure, it's very hard to grow artistically. But when you can disengage and do something else that's very different, that offers you a time of exploration, like the magic cards and like the comic book, the book covers that I do, that to me was essential for me to keep my sanity as an artist, and feel like I was evolving and growing, and so that's a big thing. So I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to work on projects like that and do these cards, to allow me to kind of explore some artistic techniques and ways to approach a design or a concept differently than I would do for a film or another project.
That's fascinating that you view almost like that the magic cards are almost like a sort of like a breather, so to speak, in your
Yeah.
schedule, which says a lot about how intense the film industry must be if it makes an assignment from magic look like whew, that's easy peasy.
Yeah, and it's me really, because I know artists who really do it, actively, and it's really a regular thing, so they will take on a large assignment and then try to produce like they would produce for a film or any kind of other project, because that's the bread and butter, and that's what they're good at, so. But to me, because I've always been able to kind of be so versatile that I can work on many different types of projects, I never really felt the need to kind of make magic my only source of income, for example, uh, because I could do other things, all the time. So I was taking it really, like you said, as a step back, and it says, and enjoying, in some ways, maybe enjoying it even more, because I know I can spend the time to kind of digest it and do it right.
What would you say if is there a style of art, because you can do a lot, obviously. Is there a particular style of art that you find to be challenging, or something that really gives you a hard time?
It's not the style that's giving me a hard time, it's the subject matter. And it's getting actually, these days, since the 3D, computer is part of the tool set of the artist, it's become much more intricate because of the complexity of the design that you can achieve that you could never, 10, 15 years ago. So the challenge is really on what the subject matter is, uh, and what also, which is a reality, what the new generation of artists is now able to produce versus what me at the same age 20 years ago was able to produce. I mean, I'm constantly amazed at the quality and how high the bar is being set every year by new artists because of all these new techniques and tools that are available that were not before, and so it even kind of forces me to be on my toes all the time because you have to keep up with that, which is a reality of that, but that's good. That is a good thing, but that means you don't become complacent and do the same thing that you used to. It's not, at least it's not me. I always need to be pushed and challenged, so the style, no, the style is not an issue. I got many different styles for many different type of projects. I'm familiar with that. I know how to approach every type of project. When it becomes difficult is when it's something that's complex to be produced. Yeah.
Do you know anything? I mean, what I find fascinating is now they're the digital art, in a sense that they're releasing it through like digital currency. Now people are taking, say, an original image that is a digital image, and they're stamping it so they can now sell it as though it were actual physical art online. And it's actually it's happening, which I find crazy. It's almost like the way MP3s revolutionized the music industry.
Mm. Do you want to develop on that? Because I'm not quite sure I understand what you're saying.
Well, so they basically, how you could find, say, like, okay, the image behind me, I grabbed it from the internet and I used it.
Yeah.
And the theory would be that because anybody can get a copy of the background that I'm using, it intrinsically loses its value, which other than the original piece that was done, the image itself isn't going to be worth anything. Well, now people are taking the actual, only created through digital, they're putting a stamp on it, and like they're able to trace it to where it started, and people are actually able to sell a digital image as though it were an original, like, oil painting. And
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, yeah, well, I do that too. It is the nature of the new tools that are being, given to artists right now. Uh, I don't think it's necessarily, it's an interesting debate because, in some ways, if at the time when you think back, where there was only one original and that was pretty much it, and you sell it, and to whom you're selling it, can make a poster out of it and stuff, but really there's only one original art. The poster is to promote the project you worked on, like if it's a film or something like that. So there was a very limited kind of exposure and diffusion of that particular artwork. But since the digital age, yes, it's true that but you could still create an original and turn it into a digital and still
right.
be selling an original and a digital one. In some ways, I think it does, at least for me, allowed me to be able to, because I became really a full-fledged painter with a digital tool. I was not a real painter from a traditional standpoint. I was by training, but I never, in terms of producing original artwork in acrylic or oil, like many of my friends who do book covers were trained. I came into this industry purely trained as a digital artist, being able to produce these paintings. So to me, the only thing that I could potentially be able to offer if I wanted to sell was a copy. So, which is what I do. I was doing prints, like you do posters and you sell that. And in some ways it's not a bad thing, because then it allows you to sell more of it at a more affordable price for people who could never afford,
Right.
an original. So now it's getting more interesting because the technology now allows printing process to create these very elaborate prints on canvases to give them a quality that is beyond just, a simple print, and to be able to create limited editions like I do for Disney and Lucas, where you can produce a very limited number, sell them at a reasonable price because it's not obviously the price of an original. And then you also have the ideas, which I've done too, and I still do for the collector's market, to offer these limited as an embellished piece of art. So, which is getting closer to creating an original, but it's still not a fully original, but it's still less at a price point than an original. So there is kind of an interesting dynamic that kind of happened with that technology that allow all these digital artists to be able to produce art in different ways, to offer them in different price points, to be able to satisfy different type of audience and collectors. In some ways, I think it's a good thing.
If you had to pick one of your, was 150 like covers that you've done, something like that?
Something like that, I guess. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very it's insane amount of covers you've done. Which one are you the most proud of? Is there one that you are just you hold up and say that's where, if I were to
Yeah,
lean...
there are a few, not one in particular. I think, let's say, let's think back. I think the very first one that I think created a shift in my artistic kind of journey, I would say, was the one called Autumn Wars. It was kind of a 4-book cover series. And I would say this one because it is the first time that I was trying to approach a cover purely from a graphic, almost impressionistic kind of idea. And it's interesting because I've always been attracted by abstract, and I still am. And the idea of representation with simplicity of shapes and colors to create the impressions of something, has always intrigued me. A lot of artists do that. And when I was doing that cover, because it represents, there was like an army of soldiers, so it's like I couldn't see myself, like I usually was doing, every nitpicky on every single characters, so I had to find a way to be very effective to suggest the amount of people in that army without necessarily spending the time to be crazy about it. And in that process, I was very efficient in creating something that I would almost call impressionistic. It's like the when you look at it as a whole, you totally understand what it says. But when you start analyzing it in details, you realize it means nothing. That could take every single detail of that image, and it would be an abstract form. But you pull back, and it totally understands what it is. So it kind of allowed me to create a brush technique that was very angular and very abstract, that kind of followed me since that cover in many other works that I've done for book covers, and even somehow in other works, but mainly in book covers, because book covers are mainly driven by your artistic style more than they are with a project. So that's why you have much more freedom with a book cover, because there's an enormous amount of flexibility, and in book covers what they are looking for is you as an artist, not you as a tool or problem solver, but you as an artist with your style. So in that regard, it's a very good ground for growth and artistic exploration. And so I developed that style, and I was so intrigued and pleased with the results that I kept pushing it to see what it could create in terms of doing more book covers, with this type of ideas. And if you look at all the book covers that I've done over the years, you could definitely see the one that tends towards this graphic, approach stylistically, and the one that are much more traditional, painterly. And so I was able, from that idea, to be able to even decide and switch even style based on the subject matter and how I wanted to approach different paintings.
That's interesting. It's almost like it may not be your favorite in a sense, but it is important because it was the one that created the shift, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it did. And then after that, I could name you a few others for other reasons. But I think this one was really a turning point for me, because it was also early enough in my career as a book cover artist that it started to tell me, oh my God, there is a whole new way that I could be thinking about as a painter to explore my art. And that could also potentially help me grow in other fields of the industry. So that style I've kind of like played with and exported it when I was doing film or theme parks in some fashion, more or less. But it's like it never kind of left me, up to
Right.
the point where today I'm like more and more attracted by the abstract, and I'm kind of working on an abstract series that has absolutely nothing to do with anything I've worked for the last 35 years. So that tells you how much I'm kind of drawn to this idea of doing abstract exploration.
Is this a personal piece, or is this something that you've been hired to do?
Oh, it's personal. It's purely personal. Man, I wish someone could hire me to do something like that, because it's like a total playground. But no, it's not. It's purely personal, and it's something I do when I have some time. And it's not just one painting. I mean, it's a whole series of projects and paintings that I've started to explore in different ways, even in 3D. I'm exploring abstract in 3D also as well right now, because I'm trying to use the tools that I've been comfortable for so many years and try to kind of reinvent another me,
Mm-hmm.
maybe for the next 10, 20 years, because eventually I'll kind of like, I'll want to switch, I'll want to do something different. I mean, I always do, but there's going to be a point that says, okay, let's try a new field, something that I've never done before.
Yeah, I mean, that's the good sign of that. Anybody should be evolving no matter what they are doing, whether it's art, whether it's, I mean, just existing.
Yeah.
If there's not an evolution happening, it's never a good sign.
That's true. And I've seen a lot of people who are so comfortable with what they do and they're so good at it, but that's all they do. And it comes to a point where it dies out,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just the juice only stays for so long. I mean,
Yeah, you stop feeling the joy of it.
it's the joys, and then your life change. You become a different person, but it's very difficult to keep up, with one thing and one thing only, and still be on top of your game, on and on and on, and more. So that's why I'm kind of really grateful that I've always been able to explore in so many different areas, in so many different fields, because that kind of always kept me on my toes, so I realized it's super important to have these kind of different tracks that you can explore.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very, you seem to be a very well adapted person for this particular sort of journey that you're on. I mean, you roll with it, and yet you have the ability to do it, and then at the same time the opportunities are also presenting themselves. It's a cool thing to see. And I only have a couple more questions for you. I won't keep you too much longer, but I want to know if you had to pick like a piece, not necessarily like your favorite, but I would love to know, is there a piece of art that you see that you think to yourself, I wish I could have done that one because it's just so good? What's a piece of art that makes you think that?
You mean from someone else?
Yes.
Oh my God. Oh, there's so many. It would not be one piece of art. It would be more like an artist in
Okay,
particular.
I'll take
And
that.
there's so many. I mean, J.C. Leyendecker, for example, I admire his work tremendously because, in some ways, for a good reason, because he found a way with a technique and a style that was so powerful yet graphic and so precise. It's just a joy to see how he painted these magazine covers and Norman Rockwell. It's like painters from this period. Were just amazing. Dean Cornwell is another one. I'm talking about American illustrators here. And that's just
Hmm.
start with uh, you know all these classical painters. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Orientalist. Some of these painters are doing these hyper realistic yet beautiful paintings. At the time, this just mind blowing. And then at the same time, I love impressionist, painters. And I'm a big fan of abstract painters. I mean, there's a lot of abstract painters. I'm looking at us as, my God, I wish I could do that kind of stuff. And actually, that inspires me to want to do and do more. I'm more inspired actually right now by abstract artists than I am with the classical ones. So classical ones, I always enjoy looking at them, but the abstract right now are kind of driving me towards a new exploration.
Right. I mean, classical, it's classical for a reason. It builds a foundation for most people when they're
Yeah,
in the arts. They're studying that first and foremost because it is the groundwork. But
yeah.
the abstract, because there's a time when people were calling it not art, and
Mm.
it's obviously time has proven them incorrect. but
Yes, of course, always. Yeah. Mm.
but uh, I wanted to know just because you seem so like like a teacher as well as being an artist of such a high caliber. What advice would you give to a young person who was interested in pursuing a career in art today? What would be some of the things you would tell them to do?
Oh, well, the first thing I think I always tell people is first, if you have an idea what it means to become an artist, because it could be anything. I mean, you could be a car designer and you could be a concept artist or do comic books and you could be designing jewelry. I mean, fashion designers, photography. I mean, what is it to be an artist? So when someone approached me and says, I want to be an artist, I says, what kind of artist do you want to be? So it's like just kind of channel the idea of what it is to be an artist for a person who's interested. And then once that is being kind of clear, I always try to tell them, if you had to project yourself in 5 or 10 years from now, what would you be doing? Because I think that clarifies the dream that they might have. If they don't have a dream, then it's easy, because I say, then why don't you learn the ABCs of arts, the foundations of arts. And in that process, you might discover a particular interest in one thing or another, because that's the beginning of it. But if you tell me, oh no, you see yourself working for Walt Disney doing, animations for these, feature animated films, then I said, great. Then if you see yourself in a direction, this is how you need to approach how to build it, in terms of the schooling, the classes you're going to take, the portfolio you're going to build, and all these kinds of things. So it's really trying to get as clear a focus as possible from the beginning, to kind of really put you on the right track, so you don't waste years of your energy and talent doing something that is not really what you want to do at the end.
That's sound advice. And I guess the final question would be, and I know that you cannot actually say if it's going to be in any specific set, but are there any magic cards on the horizon that you are working on now?
I can't say.
But you can't. I mean, you can technically say that you're
No, no,
working
no,
on
no,
it.
no, no, no. Actually, no, no. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I was just talking to a friend who's doing them right now, who's been doing it for years, who told me, because of the COVID, situation last year and how it's impacted so many artists, how grateful he was to be able to do a lot of work for Magic. And that kind of got me thinking. I says, yeah, it's been a while since I've done a card for
Yeah,
Magic.
yeah,
So I should call Jeremy and says, hey,
yes.
maybe it's time that do a few more to
Well,
just
yeah.
to refresh myself in the whole world.
Well,
Yes.
yes, because I figured I would tell you. And since you don't necessarily follow the game, the Fraxions are making a resurgence. One of them popped up on the newest set, Kaldheim, and I figured
Yep.
with your history, it might behoove you to maybe pick up the phone and say, I hear the Fraxions might be making a reappearance. It certainly would be a good time for you to pop in and maybe give us.
I think it's a very good advice and it's a very good idea. So I think I'm going to pick up the phone on Monday and I think I'm going to call Jeremy.
Hell yes. I mean, like I would be, because that's what I thought. I thought, oh man, this is gonna be a renaissance of the Fraxions. You got to be involved. It would be a sin if you weren't.
Well, okay, and I'll take it like it's now an obligation. I have to contact Jeremy.
Yes, I will. I will be so mad at you, and that would I know that will wreck you. So
Yes, I'm sensing that. So yes, I will definitely contact Jeremy.
well, awesome. I thank you again so much for speaking with me, and it was great.
It was great too. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
What a career he has had, no? And how awesome would it be if I somehow helped bring him back into the Phyrexian fold? And speaking of awesome, this week's winner of our card giveaway is Minion0470 with a Burning Rune Demon from Kaldheim. Just shoot me an email at alpermarkov@gmail.com and I can get that for you. And that brings us to the end of the video. And as all this comes to an end, so go the lilies of the valley. That was the Stevie Nicks line. I didn't write that one, but this next one I did. Until next time, I got a scoop.